Good afternoon and welcome to another episode with Chat with Chet. Today I am joined by Gary Barlet, the CTO for Illumio Public Sector. And Gary, why don't you maybe go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll just jump right into it.
Sure, Chet. Well, thanks for having me, first off. As you mentioned, I'm the public sector CTO here at Illumio. Been doing this for coming up on 3 years now. Prior to that, I was the CIO at the Office of the Inspector General for the United States Postal Service. Did that job for a short 10 years. And before that, I was a cyberspace operations officer in the United States Air Force, where I retired after 20 years of service.
Fantastic. So I'm excited for this conversation because I think you're going to have both some very unique perspectives of having been in the government as well as now being on the public sector side. So I think this will be a good conversation. So, let's jump right in. Buzzword, right? Big buzzword, zero trust, right? We hear about zero trust all the time, especially from a government perspective. There's the 2021 executive order, these mandates that are coming out, and I'm curious on what you're seeing as it relates to the implementation of zero trust and how agencies are thinking about how to go about doing it, implementing it, and just their thoughts in general.
Sure. So, first of all, one of the things that, people need to understand is, right, zero trust is not a technology. It's not a solution, right? It's a mindset. It's a framework. It's an approach towards security. And the reason why I emphasize that is over the last several years, we have definitely seen customers, as we've approached them, or potential customers in the federal government, really go through that transition, right, where they're really starting to show an understanding of what zero trust is really about, what the principles of zero trust are really about. I spend less time now educating people on what zero trust is, and I spend more time talking about the principles of zero trust, how particular technologies fit into those principles, and how they can be applied to meet the desires and the end goals of zero trust. So I think that's been one of the most satisfying things that I've noticed over the last couple of years is the federal government as a whole has really embraced zero trust, and they've really come to an understanding of what zero trust is. Sometimes they get a little confused on specific technologies or specific aspects, but conceptually, we're not selling the idea, the concept of zero trust anymore. They've embraced that. Now it's really the how, right, to meet some of those mandates.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about the how. I think some agencies are running into maybe some challenges as it relates to implementation, right? So if you think about it, there's some agencies probably have systems that still will be potentially even decades old, and some of these systems and networks really weren't designed for a zero trust paradigm. They were more designed for what's the fort type of mentality, where hard outer shell, soft gooey middle,
right,
if you will. So I'm interested in from an implementation perspective on how organizations should be thinking about this, especially if they're dealing with both combinations of new infrastructure and some investments, but at the same time trying to deal with their existing systems.
No, that's a great point. That's probably one of the biggest challenges that we see with our customers. Is the fact that they've got this huge, what I'll refer to as, right, a tech deficit, right? Like you said, they've got things that are decades old. I mean, we've got customers that are still using mainframes. So you're talking about, from a gamut of mainframes all the way up to, web native services, right? Cloud native services. And that's quite the gamut to try to worry about and try to cover. And I think that one of the things that we've worked with our customers to understand, and as we work to educate people, is the fact that you can't rely on that traditional model of the hardened perimeter, right? Because invariably that hardened perimeter gets penetrated in one way, shape, or form. And that's just borne out by the fact that we keep throwing money at trying to stop ransomware, and yet ransomware continues to promulgate, and really the impact of ransomware continues to increase. And part of the reason that happens is because of that huge gamut of tech that federal agencies are trying to deal with. And then as soon as something gets inside that outer perimeter, there's not a lot to prevent that lateral movement inside an enterprise. So we've been working with our customers to understand that you really need to take an inside-out approach when you're looking at zero trust. You need to figure out how can you segment off some of these older technologies that don't have good security built into them from some of these newer technologies that do have some better security built into them, and how do you prevent them from impacting each other if one or the other should get compromised. So that understanding that you're never going to stop all compromises, you're never going to stop all breaches, and really shift into a mindset of how do I minimize the impact of a breach? And then how do I ensure that I get to continue my mission, that a single breach doesn't shut down my entire enterprise?
Yeah, those are all good things to think about. As they work through that, I think a combination of both the infrastructure and the existing tools that they have, as well as I hear more and more some of the agencies they are dealing with an aging workforce, and a lot of these folks have been in these positions a long time, and they're geared up to retire, and even before maybe necessarily the current political challenges that we're seeing right now, I still think some of the agencies struggled with the workforce and skill gaps. And I'm curious obviously you spend a lot of time at the Postal Service and others, and what can agencies do maybe to try to help bridge that gap to make sure that they've got the people trained and these smart people who can help implement and help handle the zero trust
Yeah,
activities.
so I think there's a couple of ways that, and certainly some of the ways that I approach the problem is, number one, right? You've always got this desire to try to continue to educate the workforce that you do have, right? So oftentimes we give lip service to doing that, but then we don't give people time, right? We don't give them the money to go pay for courses. We don't let them travel to a course if that's what's necessary. And there are ways that you can work around that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to say, hey, I want to invest in my current workforce, then you have to put your money where your mouth is and give them the time off and pay for the courses in order for them to get a chance to invest in that, right? So that's how you need to approach your current workforce and the employees that you have, but also that, think about when you're hiring in new people, right? Sometimes we automatically default to, oh, wouldn't it be great if we hired somebody with 20 years of experience or 15 years of experience? Which there's something to be said for that, but you got to be careful that you're not hiring in the same kind of workforce that you already have, right? When you hire in new people, it's a chance to hire in some new talent, some fresh talent. So maybe look at some of those, people that have only been around for 4 or 5 years, but they've been doing the new things, right? They haven't been doing the traditional things. They're more familiar and more trained in some of the newer technologies, the newer approaches. And just go, hey, I'm willing to not hire someone with 20 years of experience, but I'm bringing in somebody that's got, actual real world experience based on, where I know I've got some of my gaps. And even if that means, looking at things like, do I really need everyone to have a college degree? I'm not knocking college degrees. I'm just saying that, sometimes hiring somebody that's been doing the job with their hands on a keyboard for 4 or 5 years may be more practical to your circumstances than hiring somebody that was spent the last 4 or 5 years in college and had just graduated. So trying to rethink the type of workforce that we're looking to hire and how we can reshape the workforce that we have, I think is really the only way to solve that problem.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue. There's going to be a continued need for that, just as things continue to go forward. Let's assume that we're still going to see maybe a reduction in workforce across the federal government. Politics aside, I think we'll see a little bit of that, and that will create a little bit of an unrest. So it's going to be important to take who we have, who's there, and make sure that we are continually investing in the training on, so that they are able to, if you will, carry the torch.
Absolutely. And the other thing I've talked about in the past is I would love to see government get a little more creative about incentives, right? The government's never going to compete with the commercial industry on pay, benefits, right? It's really hard to compete with the commercial sector in some of these aspects, right? You don't have stock options you can give people, right? You're not going to have ping pong tables in the lobby. You're just not going to have those types of things in government. But looking at other creative ways of, promising training or, maybe student loan forgiveness, right? Hey, we'll help pay off some of your student loans if you have just come out of college. Maybe, for every year that you work for us, we'll look at paying off some of your student loan debt. Things like that. I think the government needs to start to get a little more creative in the way that they try to attract talent.
Yeah, I think that those all are, I think, really good ideas that government needs to think about. Let's talk tech a minute. And you alluded to it just a few minutes ago, right? Uh, One of the challenges from a zero trust perspective, and again, some of these networks and the way these are architected, one of the bigger challenges that we're seeing in both in traditional networks and even in networks where they're starting to come in and bridge, I'll call it, you're connecting your IoT and OT types of things into your IT networks and controls, is this notion of east-west traffic and the concept of lateral movement. And I'm interested in your thoughts on best practices on how organizations are very good. They understand, right, traffic north and south. I think they can kind of figure out how that all flows. But I think most organizations have a blind spot when it's east-west as they do that. So I'm interested in your thoughts on how organizations and these agencies should be thinking about that type of traffic, and maybe how to get some visibility around that, and how to handle maybe some protection and some guardrails in those situations.
Right. So I think the first mistake that we see people make is this assumption that they understand what's actually going on inside their enterprise. And I can tell you from experience, they don't. Right. And I say that not because they're not being realistic in saying that, I think I know what's going on. The reality is, everyone, when we walk into a customer, we usually surprise them. And the problem is, right, oftentimes the people that, especially certainly at certain levels of leadership, right, they're used to seeing diagrams. Somebody produced a nice Visio diagram, a nice PowerPoint diagram. They say, here's how things are. The reality is, in today's complex world of interconnections, it doesn't fit cleanly on a PowerPoint slide or on a Visio diagram. And there aren't many tools out there that actually come in and say, hey, forget the way that you think your enterprise is wired, because the way things are physically connected, while important, is really not as important as what's actually talking to what. Which devices on your enterprise are communicating with which other devices, and using what ports and what protocols. Most people really don't have a clear understanding of really how things are communicating on their enterprise. And those are the people that get surprised when they get compromised, because they ask themselves, well, I don't understand. This web server over here got compromised. How in the world did they get to one of my crown jewels? Those two things don't talk to each other. And you go, well, maybe they did. Maybe you weren't aware that they actually were connected to each other. Or more likely, that web server was connected to a box. It was connected to a box. It was connected to your crown jewels. And the adversary or the malware or the ransomware just hopped from box to box to box until it got to its final target, which is your crown jewels, usually where your data resides, right? And most people don't have good visibility on that. And then even if they think they understand it, they don't have any controls in place to limit those connections, such that, hey, we only allow connections that are absolutely necessary for the conduct of our mission and for applications to work. And then we should turn everything else off. That's zero trust, right? Zero trust is all about the principle of not just trust but verify, but to actually go to an allow model where you identify that you're going to allow only the things that are absolutely necessary for conducting your mission, between application to application communication. And then you're going to shut everything else off so that some adversary, some piece of malware can't use those back doors to hop from box to box to box.
Yeah, and in cases like that, right? So one of the other things, and last time when we were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about this. A lot of organizations today rely on endpoint protection. They're in the EDR solution, and they'll just assume that's all they need, and they'll say, "Hey, I got this, so I should be good." But in reality, I think that's a little misguided.
No, it is misguided, right? And I'm not saying that EDR, XDR. I'm not saying that those endpoint protections aren't necessary. The problem is, I know you've been around, for a while, like I have, Chet. Back in the day was, if we just had good antivirus on our servers, all of our problems would go away. And that has proven to not be the case for the last 20 plus years, 30 plus years. I guess I'm starting to date myself here. But some of these endpoint solutions, these EDR, XDRs are the same thing, right? They're trying to look for and identify behavior, as it's happening. And unfortunately, the solutions that are doing that aren't keeping pace with the attacks that are occurring, or you get an attack that mimics legitimate behavior, right? So therefore, the endpoint solution thinks that it's okay. So there's a failing in some of these endpoint solutions, and the problem is once a individual bot is compromised, adversaries or ransomware use that bot as a jumping off point to try to spread itself through the enterprise. And unfortunately, it can often do that in a way that's kind of the low and slow, mimic real behavior, legitimate behavior. That some of these endpoint solutions just can't figure out. They can't catch one too fast enough. So they just become, they get bypassed, right? They become ineffective.
Yeah, and a lot of them still today, I think, rely. They're more signature based still, and I think that's protecting from what we know. I think what we don't know is significantly larger than what we do know.
Absolutely, so. and the current answer, right? It used to be heuristics, right? Heuristics and behavioral analysis. Now it's AI. It's going to solve that problem, right? It's not going to be signature based, right? We're going to have something that's smart enough to detect or sniff out when something untoward is happening. The problem is the adversaries that are attacking enterprises are using the same tools, but they're using them faster and more creative than the defenders are using them. And partially just because they're not constrained by necessarily by resources, by policy or law. The attackers have an unfettered ability to try to make the most out of new technology, and I'm thinking of AI specifically at this point. Oftentimes, much more so than the defenders do. So it's always going to be a whack-a-mole game. But unfortunately, I think that the whack-a-mole is a losing battle because the heads are going to keep popping up, right? And that's the adversaries that are just going to keep popping up. And at some point, you and I both know it only takes one, right? One compromise, one hook, right? They get their foot in the door one time, and oftentimes that's all it takes.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more of that just ourselves, the types of attacks that we're getting, like I'll call it just even the phishing attacks that we're seeing come through email are getting pretty darn good. It's gone are the days where misspelled words or even the grammar, you can tell it was poorly written. There are some that are just very, very good, and clearly the AI is assisting in that to make that even better.
Absolutely. When you think about using AI for that, when you think about being able to use AI to mimic like my voice, my persona, yep. Right? Even on a video call now, right? You're putting a lot of onus on end users. Like you said, the days of them falling for a stupid email that oh come on, a fifth grader could have looked at that email and said something's wrong with that email, right? Because of the advancements in technology and AI. It is not uncommon for even very sophisticated users to get tricked. So we've got to figure out a way. The attacks aren't going to stop, right? There's no easy button for users to be your first line of defense anymore, right? So you have to assume you're going to get breached, and the question becomes, okay, if I assume I'm going to get breached, what then? What's next? What have I done to deal with that breach when it, not if, but when it happens, and what have I done to minimize the impact of that breach?
Yeah, and all very critical things for organizations to think about. AI just fascinates me in a lot of ways. I do a lot of research with machine learning algorithms as well as AI as it relates to organizations. As it relates to zero trust. If an organization is saying, right, well, all software vendors, everybody's running around saying, hey, I got an AI enabled this or an AI enabled that. But I'm curious in your thoughts on, where is an organization really going to find value from AI in this scope of zero trust, and how can they leverage that to, help augment or improve their protection?
Yeah, well, it's funny. You actually said what I consider to be one of the magic words, which is augmenting your staff, right? I think that AI, does play a role in trying to defend autonomously, right? And trying to defend against certain types of attack and trying to take automated actions, right, to defer certain types of attack. But I think where AI stands the potential to have an even bigger impact is to help defenders, human defenders, be able to surface things much, much quicker. right, and take large amounts of information that might be different threat indicators across an enterprise, right, and be able to quickly digest that down and surface it in such a way that I, as a human being, can look at that and go, look, I know that's a problem. Or, hey, that's going to help me from a defensive perspective, right? You think about, I cannot, I can't count, I lost track of the number of times where when I was a CIO and a new CVE would come out. And the first question I would get asked by my boss and the first question I would ask my team is, how does this CVE apply to my enterprise? Right? And that was a very arduous process for them to go through, oftentimes going, okay, let me digest what that CVE is really addressing. What's the threat vector? Right now, how do I look across the entire enterprise and figure out the applicability of that threat vector across my enterprise, right? Now imagine AI doing that for you and surfacing that immediately and going, hey, Gary, this CVE just came out, 5 minutes ago, and here's an analysis of your enterprise, and here's where you may have a problem. Make some decisions based on that analysis. Right? And I could decide, oh, maybe I need to take a system offline to protect it and make sure that it's not exposed. Or I look at it and go, hey, I'm safe because I've already got other protections in place that guard against that particular attack vector, right? So I think that AI being able to help augment, right, that decision making and surface that kind of complex information in a very easy format that kind of almost gives me an easy button to go, let me click on that and see the impact of something, and now I can make some informed decisions. I think there's some real value in AI there.
Yeah, and it's just going to continue to grow the applications of that. I think we haven't even scratched the surface of how AI is employed in a variety of different things, including this. I was thinking about going through some notes from our last conversation. We really didn't get into it much, but I'm curious. Again, this is such a big deal, and I think we've got different government organizations trying to do different things in this cyberspace to help organizations. We're starting to see maybe some cross-agency initiatives. I'm interested in, from your perspective, like we get the CISAs of the world, and there's the Joint Cyber Defense, collaborative that's trying to put together some working groups. How can how can industry maybe and collaborate and work with these government agencies to try to really, create a better, if you will, a better path forward for organizations, both commercially and from the government, to implement zero trust?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things I would love to see more is more, I say information exchange, but really, in industry, we see a lot of things and we learn a lot of lessons, right? And we walk in to talk to customers and say, oh yeah, we've seen this 500 times or whatever. But I think that sometimes there's this failing of providing those kinds of things up, right, to agencies like CISA to help make sure that they understand, hey, it's not just what you're seeing, but also what industry is seeing. And you see some partnerships like that, with some of the big companies, globally. But I think that a lot of smaller companies that are implementing newer technologies, I think sometimes are seeing things very quickly. And I think that if there was more of a cooperation between industry and government, where there's a little bit more of a free flow of information sharing, and that works in both directions, right? If unfortunately, and after 20 years in the military, I'm really familiar with this. We overclassify things, right? Oh, we can't talk about that because it's a secret, right? Well, guess what? That secret that you're not talking about, industry may be seeing it, but they don't necessarily understand exactly what they're seeing because they lack some context. And if only government would provide some context, or the intel community might provide some context, then the commercial sector might be able to respond to it, more rapidly from a innovation and from a product perspective, right? So I really wish there's a little bit better information flow, information exchange back and forth between industry and government. And I know that they've been working on it, and it certainly has been getting better. Don't get me wrong. I just think there's some strides that can be made still, some definite progress that can be made in that information exchange, so that we can all collectively work together to try to protect. They're not just governmental resources. It's my tax information at the IRS. It's my information at the Social Security Administration. So I care just as much as the employees at IRS or the employees at Social Security about protecting that information. So we're all in this together. We should all be cooperating to try to improve cybersecurity.
Yeah. So if we come here, maybe we're just about out of time. I'm curious, any additional words of wisdom that we you want to share or talk about as it relates to zero trust or anything else that might be on your mind given everything that's going on.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would say from a zero trust perspective is one of the things that continuously amazes me is, and we had touched on it a little bit earlier, is people thinking that they understand what's going on their enterprise, right? In order to implement any kind of zero trust technology or strategy or policy, the first thing you have to have an understanding is what do I have and what is it doing? So that visibility, everything you do should start with visibility. You'll get to the defensive actions, you'll get to the shutting things down. But if you can't see things and you can't understand what's happening on your enterprise and you don't have a good handle on that, then any policy that you make is kind of a guess, right? And any technology you implement, you're going to kind of be feeling your way through the dark if you don't have some good visibility, right? So when you look at some of the zero trust models out there, they always have visibility as like a foundational element. It's not even a pillar, right? It's usually a cross-cutting element or a foundational element. And I think too many people skip that piece and they go right to one of the pillars and say, we're going to focus on this pillar or try to do all the pillars. And I think they skip that step of how critical and how important visibility is.
Yeah, fantastic. It's good insight. So one last question, totally unrelated to zero trust. We are coming into March Madness, right? Here, March Madness, probably from March here come Wednesday, Thursday, the amount of work that's going to get done in offices around the country is going to go to, it'll diminish greatly. Interested in any thoughts? You watch basketball? Any predictions from the tournament?
So I do watch. Well, I think I can make an easy prediction. Probably an SEC team's going to win, right? I mean, I think that's an easy bet, right? Is the fact that an SEC team is probably going to come out on top given the number of teams they got in the tournament. I just really enjoy watching these tournaments, right? I love watching, right? This is kind of, I personally enjoy this time of year better than professional basketball. And I honestly, my wife got me into, I really enjoy watching the women's college basketball games. It just seems a little more pure and a little more innocent, I think, maybe, than some of the other professional games. So I just love this type of year. I don't root for any particular school or against any particular school, but I do love underdog stories. So I'm really hoping there's going to be some good underdog stories this year.
I think so. It's always fun. You get those Cinderella teams, and they don't call it March Madness, for there's always a reason for that.
Exactly. My favorite thing will be, I know there's going to be a ton of people that used AI to predict their brackets. I really want to see somebody come forward and say, I got the perfect bracket because of AI. And when that doesn't happen, everybody's going to go, maybe AI is not as great as we all think it is.
Yeah. So we're going to publish a blog post here soon enough. I did use AI to generate a couple of them, so we'll see how it does.
Definitely need to follow up with me and let me know what the percentage was.
Yep. And one last thing, because I know we haven't really talked about it. I think you might be up for a Defense Scoop 50 award. I think
I am. I appreciate the shout out. So any of your listeners out there and your viewers, please go vote. I'd appreciate the votes.
Absolutely, and it'd be a good vote. So. Well, Gary, I appreciate you taking the time to chat. It's been a good conversation, a fun conversation. I appreciate the insight and the thought leadership. And for those of you who have joined in, again, we appreciate you taking your time out of your day to spend a few minutes with us. And that does it for now. And so everybody stay safe. And until next time, we talk to you later.
Have a great day, everybody.